Buck Rogers of the 25th century wasn't born into Star Wars. Instead, he made his mark through pulp magazines, radio waves, and matinee serials. But when the 1970s arrived, it was either fight or fade away into irrelevancy. Relics brought back from the vaults, disco makeovers featuring lasers and glitter, and gambles that brought pulp back into the limelight. These are 20 weird facts about Buck Rogers in the 25th century. Buried beneath polyester clothing and primetime glow was history colliding with future. Buck Rogers defied their attempts at burial. Instead, he became an icon. To begin with, his history predates Hollywood. It all started in 1928 in Philip Francis Nolan's pulp novella Armageddon 2419 AD, when a World War I veteran awakens in 25th century to find himself among jetpacks and ray guns. Within a year, Buck had taken off, appearing in comic strips and radio broadcasts before eventually landing a spot in Buster Crabbe's 1939 serial as one of the first great space heroes. Buck Rogers once represented America's future, inspiring generations of kids to dream of rocket belts and interstellar battles. By the 1970s, however, he had become something of an anachronism. Culture had moved past him onto Planet of the Apes, Star Trek, and James Bond, before Star Wars came along and changed everything forever. Every studio wanted its own space epic. Universal searched its vault, and Glenna was hired. Larison, fresh off Battlestar Galactica success, revived Buck Rogers for the disco era with glossy production values, spandex attire, and swagger. No longer just an obscure comic strip but an energetic revival designed to take advantage of space opera fervor. Twofold reason was Buck Rogers was never meant to become a film adaptation. NBC had ordered a 2-hour pilot to gauge its chances for creating a Star Wars-related weekly show, hoping to capitalize quietly on its growing success, but Universal saw dollar signs instead. They took the finished pilot, edited it for theaters, and released it for theater viewing in March 1979, betting that nostalgia and space fever could transform an unlikely TV gamble into box office gold. Much to everyone's amazement, their gamble paid off. At just $3.5 million budget, this movie grossed over $21 million domestically, an achievement usually reserved for much larger productions. Audiences were instantly drawn in by Gil Gerard's wisecracking Buck, Aaron Gay's glamorous Colonel Wilma Madeering, and Twiki's catchphrase "Bitty Bitty Bitty." As a result, audiences filled NBC theaters for this film's theatrical run, triggering them to launch it as an ongoing series. Overnight, an unexpected one-off experiment became an iconic franchise revival, and Buck Rogers leapfrogged from pulp history into late 70s pop culture with surprising speed. When his ship Ranger 3 set sail into the future for adventure with Buck, his name resonated much like Pulp Fiction. NASA actually sent Ranger 3 on an unplanned mission to the moon in 1962. Instead of succeeding and making history as planned, however, its flight path veered into deep space instead and disintegrated completely, an irony not lost on us today. The connection is uncanny. No one involved with the show has confirmed this connection, but its significance makes Buck's frozen voyage even stranger and more believable. His shuttle wasn't simply imaginary. Resonating with real history, Buck Rogers served as a reminder that space travel often veers off course into unknown territories. Fourthly, Universal looked for someone recognizable to carry the star power from Star Wars into Buck Rogers. Unfortunately, Gil Gerard wasn't that person. Gerard was then an established working actor known for commercials and modest TV roles, not exactly an ideal candidate to star in an epic sci-fi revival. However, at his screen test, he had shown remarkable presence, walking in with ease, tall with broad shoulders but charming enough that it felt more like blue-collar pilot than polished space hero. Buck was defined by his unique approach. Instead of being an overly stylized pulp throwback, he became relatable everyman who met this bizarre future with humor, skepticism, and flashes of vulnerability. Gerard later admitted he didn't always enjoy the scripts, sometimes clashing with producers over Buck's jokey tonality. Yet his casting proved essential. Without him, the 25th century might have felt lifeless. With him at its center, it had an undeniable heart. Buck was flawed yet humanized to make disco-era space opera believable. When Erin Gray signed on as Colonel Wilma Deering, she thought she'd found an amazing role combining brains, authority, and glamour that could define her career path. But that would never happen. Hollywood still had its demands, even in the 25th century. Following filming of the pilot episode, producers briefly considered replacing Gray with actress Juan and Clay instead, before realizing she provided them with what they needed and quickly scrambling to bring her back, at any cost. Gray would need to change her look for them to consider doing it again. Gray was initially instructed to go blonde due to an outdated studio belief that lighter locks made women appear more approachable to audiences. She eventually agreed, yet her resentments began building until by season 2 she rebelled and returned to her natural brunette color, insisting Wilma didn't need peroxide for authority. Gray later credits Wilma as being an inspiration, not just to viewers but to herself as well. Gray later sees Wilma as both an icon for viewers as well as herself. Fans loved her either way and saw Wilma not just as an iconic role model for viewers but for herself too. Proof that strength doesn't require studio polish. Behind the scenes of Buck Rogers was an ongoing battle not against aliens but between Gil Gerard and the writing staff. Gerard found himself increasingly annoyed at how Buck often appeared like an annoying and lightweight character on the show, rather than being treated as a serious hero. Buck often challenged dialogue, softened jokes, or even rewrote lines on the fly, prompting writers to complain that he was difficult and making them frustrated with him. Gerard justified his conflict as an attempt to protect Buck's dignity. He wanted Buck to inspire rather than just quip. This caused friction that never subsided. While some may have taken it as personal attack, others later admitted he was right. The show never quite managed to settle into either parody or adventure, giving Buck more humanity than was sometimes allowed by script. Longtime viewers gasped in disbelief when Brigadier Gordon burst in during episode number 7's Planet of Slave Girls episode. Buster Crabbe played him, the original Buck Rogers from 1939 serial, as well as Flash Gordon before then. Crabbe wasn't just there as an actor, his presence served as meta-time travel. In an unforgettable exchange between himself and Gil Gerard, Crabbe told Gil Gerard, "I have been doing that kind of stuff ever since before you were born, Captain." For older viewers, the episode was an ode to their youth. Younger fans used it as a bridge between different eras of science fiction, from Depression-era movie serials to disco-era television, with Crabbe's cameo giving instant legitimacy to the new Buck Rogers and reminding everyone that its legacy had indeed passed on from generation to generation. And with that cameo came number 8. Buck Rogers represented an everyman hero, while Princess Ardala was his glittering opposite, an embodiment of danger wrapped up in seduction, played by Pamela Hensley as Ardala. While Buck was content ruling his own world, Ardala wanted Earth as well, with Buck in chains as proof. Ardala wasn't just eye candy. She was cunning, ruthless, and somehow sympathetic too. She became one of Buck's main adversaries as she attempted to assert her dominance in an unpredictable universe that continuously underestimated her. Joined with Kane, initially Henry Silva and later Michael and Sarah, she quickly established herself as his true adversary during his 25th century adventures. Fans couldn't take their eyes off Ardala Hensley. Even critics who didn't enjoy the show admitted she had presence. Ardala turned camp into command, striding through disco sci-fi chaos with all the confidence of an ambitious queen who knew desire was often dangerous territory. Buck Rogers' movie, released to theaters in 1979, was unabashedly filthy and irreverent compared to anything NBC wanted on primetime television. Buck cursed Wilma Balsey and murdered Tiger with cold blood. Opening credits featured racy images of women more reminiscent of James Bond films than typical Saturday night family viewing material. But after being edited for television viewing, all that changed. NBC removed swearing, preserved Tiger alive, and substituted an opening that wasn't as provocative, producing a more sedate version of Buck that fit better with their time slot than its theatrical version but lost some of the edge that made the theatrical cut so successful. Fans who saw both versions noticed an obvious difference. Fans who only saw one version noticed when Buck winked his way across. Number 10 in this series played it straight. Tweaky was Twicky's sidekick. Fans never forgot his wisecracking robot voice. Yet Twicky was actually two performers combined into one character. Felix Silla was best known in the Addams Family as Cousin-It. From body language, to shuffles, to comic timing, every aspect was executed flawlessly by Felix while sweating it out inside heavy metal and fiberglass armor. Mel Blanc, best known for his role as Donald Duck on Looney Tunes, had frequently mocked space opera during its 241/2 years of existence as Duck Dodgers. Blanc added Twicky his trademark bitty bitty stutter, turning what could have been just another robot into an iconic pop culture character. Unfortunately, however, after 5 episodes, Blanc was abruptly replaced by Bob Ella from Universal staffer. No explanation was offered, and viewers were left confused when Twicky suddenly seemed like another character. Blanc was quickly back with us soon afterward. His personality was quickly restored, yet this brief switch remains one of the strangest quirks in Buck Rogers' production history, serving as a reminder that even in 25th century stars could still be temperamental. Number 11 remains one of his notable quirks to this day. Joseph Wiseman made history when he played Dr. No for James Bond, but when the film was recut for television, most of his scenes disappeared. What was meant to be an intimidating villain was reduced to an eye-rolling hologram cameo. Further compounding his disgraceful portrayal, early merchandise featuring Draco was created using rough cuts and concept art, thus making his image visible even though his role was minimal. Fans who had anticipated a larger-than-life villain were disappointed to discover nothing of note, with Wiseman quickly dissolving into obscurity. Years later he returned for one episode called Vegas in Space, but by that point the missing Emperor had become one of its strangest footnotes. Number 12. Buck Rogers in the 25th century may not have started out completely from scratch. Rather, it was pieced together from remnants of another failed space opera series. Just months earlier, Battlestar Galactica had been cancelled, leaving an abundance of unused props, costumes, and models sitting idle in warehouses. Universal wasn't about to let these assets rot. Landrem Galactica's armored ground vehicle quickly made an appearance at Buck Rogers, where it was painted up to look as if it belonged in the 25th century. Ranger 3 Buck's shuttle vehicle was actually taken directly from Galactica's two-part episode, Greetings from Earth, then stripped, polished, and reimagined for use as Ranger 3. Ralph McQuarrie left his signature mark all over Terran starfighters from Galactica. Even their designs bore his imprint. These original sketches from Galactica were brought back out and transformed into Buck's sleek starfighters, an almost ghostly crossover between Galactica's haunted DNA in every hangar and battle scene and Terran starfighters designed by him. At its heart, Buck's decision was driven by efficiency, saving millions by quietly canceling one show to fund another one. For him, this meant building his future from his past, literally taking pieces from number 13 from number 25th century and applying them. Buck's world was drawn heavily from Earth's architecture. Since Universal did not have the budget for building futuristic cities of tomorrow, their crew employed clever location scouting strategies instead. The Bonaventure Hotel of Los Angeles provided a futuristic glass and steel tower as a recurring backdrop, its reflective surfaces acting as alien skylines. Scenes depicting Apollo rocket launches were taken directly from NASA footage, further grounding Buck in real space history. Even Expo 67's futuristic pavilions in Montreal reflected this, recycling remnants from humanity's hopeful past to create the foundations of humanity's glorious tomorrow. Audiences at home found its combination of concrete, steel, and stock footage felt seamless, providing them with an optimistic yet believable vision of tomorrow. As anyone familiar with familiar landmarks could tell you, it was a surreal trick, suggesting a future built from places you could visit on vacation, and that wasn't so far off in reality. In its own way, suggesting the 25th century wasn't all that far off, but was instead hiding right under our noses at number 14. By the time Buck Rogers returned for its second season, its face had undergone radical transformation. Season 1 had been an enjoyable disco-flavored space opera filled with camp villains and wisecracks. Gil Gerard wanted something heavier. Producers agreed, recasting the series into a voyage of the week adventure aboard the Starship Searcher reminiscent of Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica. Instead of fighting Ardala or saving, Gary Coleman came off like an eccentric child genius delivering technobabble with deadpan humor. Every week felt like an unpredictable gamble. Would the episode lean toward high adventure, campy flirtation, or moral sermonizing? While fans may debate its quality, its roster of guest stars made this series a time capsule of late 70s and early 80s television, featuring household names who later went on to become legends, some who even made brief cameo appearances into 25th century. Number 16. When Buck Rogers in the 25th century first debuted on ITV in Britain in 1980, its initial airing triggered a cultural battleground that would last decades afterward. Saturday nights had long been associated with Doctor Who on BBC, with Tom Baker's eccentric smile dominating living rooms. But with ITV coming along suddenly with something flashier, Gil Gerard's smirking Buck, Erin Gray in her sleek uniform, and discolored dogfights funded by American budgets, and suddenly Saturdays in Britain belonged to them both. Episodes like Planet of the Slave Girls attracted millions, while for an equally brief window Buck Rogers stole away a significant portion of BBC audiences, especially during its initial run on BBC. Unfortunately, its timing proved disastrous for them both. Dr. Baker had reached the end of his legendary run as Doctor Who, and its aging sets and slower pacing began to look worn against Buck's more glossy production values. Ratings plummeted, prompting BBC to move it away from Saturday night slot. Did Buck single-handedly overthrow the Time Lord? Probably not. But competition was painful. In one unexpected season, an American pulp revival gave one of Britain's enduring sci-fi icons Ariel scare, proving that TV wars still very much existed even in the 25th century. Number 17. Buck's bomb at Tiger Men appeared to be the end of him. Yet when NBC retold the film as a series, continuity was disregarded and Tiger reappeared as if nothing had occurred because audiences loved him so much. Ardala's court became legendary because of his silence and presence. Producers gambled that viewers would forgive any inconsistency if it meant keeping Ardala on screen. Death wasn't permanent in TV land, ratings were. Tiger Men survival showed that in Buck's universe, narrative coherence gave way to spectacle and fan demand was given priority over narrative coherence. Children reveled in laser dogfights while adults laughed off his campy antics, yet critics were far less forgiving. Some reviews lambasted it as an imitation of Star Wars. Other critics included episodes such as Space Rock on their lists of worst sci-fi hours ever broadcast. Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray struggled to maintain dignity in their roles, yet the show's uneven tone, oscillating between moral sermons and disco comedy, made it easy for critics to make fun of. Decades later, however, this very inconsistency became part of its cult charm. Critics criticized it for being shallow. Fans remembered it fondly as bizarre yet entertaining entertainment. For them, bad wasn't an insult but an invitation. For a brief and breathtaking moment in time, Buck Rogers in the 25th century looked set to rival Star Wars in terms of toy sales. Megacorp, already famous for their action figures, quickly grabbed onto this license and filled stores with Buck, Wilma, Ardala and Twiki dolls as soon as it was granted. Starfighters and Draconian Marauders came available as plastic model kits. Kids carried lunchboxes decorated with Gil Gerard's smile and puzzles and board games bearing his logo. Marketing efforts surrounding Buck were immense. His presence was treated not as just another television gamble, but as the next great space opera brand. Unfortunately, however, there was one catch. Contrasting Star Wars with its global film phenomenon, Buck Rogers was limited to television series that struggled with tone and ratings. Toys sold briskly between 1979 to 1980 on the wave of disco-led space mania. However, once Season 2 wrapped, interest quickly petered out. Today, collectors fetch high prices for these toys, relics of an era when Universal and Mego believed Buck could dominate toy aisles like Luke Skywalker had done. For kids of that era, though, it didn't matter. Buck was their hero even if only for one Saturday night each month at number 20. Buck Rogers didn't just disappear after leaving NBC. Instead, he reappeared in arcades. Sega released Buck Rogers, Plaintoff Zoom as one of the earliest 3D rail shooters. Players navigated neon tunnels dodging geometric obstacles while blasting squadrons of enemies. Strangely, Buck himself never appeared on screen, just the player ship in hyperspace. But this didn't matter. Just seeing Buck Rogers on the cabinet would draw kids who'd grown up watching the series or simply craved space adventure. The game quickly became an international phenomenon, feeding quarters to children across America, Japan, and Europe. Later it reached home through ports on Atari 2600, Commodore 64, and ColecoVision systems, spreading Buck into living rooms just as his TV show faded away into reruns. Buck Rogers became more than just a pulp hero or disco relic. For an entire generation, he was their plaything on an arcade machine and their afternoon pastime. Planet of Zoom kept Buck alive long after the series itself had ended, proving that video games can keep heroes running forever. Bonus fact, Buck Rogers wasn't just brought back for late 70s nostalgia. He was also an important blueprint. Without Buck's serialized pulp adventures, there would have been no Flash Gordon, Star Wars, or endless stream of space operas that followed. Children in 1979 did